has close to 30 years of experience in the leadership, management and personal coaching industry. He has trained thousands across the globe. In fact, his book, The 5 Pillars of Leadership, is a blueprint, if you like, of leadership in the 21st century. Our guest today is Global Chairman of Leadership Management Institute, Randy Slechta. Randy, thank you so much for taking time out for us. It's a pleasure to have you here on ET Now. I want to start by talking to you about what really struck me as a participant in one of the LMI programs, and that is a quote, the affirmation that was coined by, your founder, Paul Meyer. And I'm going to read out that quote. It says, "Whatever you vividly imagine, ardently desire, and enthusiastically act upon must inevitably come to pass." Are you saying here that desire is the ultimate quality of a successful person?
It's certainly one of the most important. But the quote is amazing because it's actually a sequence of steps. You first vividly imagine something. And when you create that vivid imagination, that starts to build the desire. So then you sincerely desire something. As you desire, then you start to believe in what you can achieve. And when you believe, then that creates the action steps where you move on your goal, and that helps you attain the result that you want.
Okay, let's talk about a new lot of CEOs that are cropping, and I'm largely referring to the Silicon Valley tech CEOs that we keep reading about of late. Sundar Pichai, Satya Nadella, the new Uber CEO, they seem to be exuding a lot more empathy. They're a lot less non-combative. Is the model CEO in today's world changing?
Yes, absolutely, especially the successful ones. Because as we move forward and in the new economy where the key attributes are people, in terms of this creativity, the innovation, the new ideas that they can provide, you've got to engage those people to bring out those qualities, to bring out that creativity. You can't just command it from them. And consequently, new leaders have to have that emotional intelligence, that empathy, those interpersonal skills to be able to engage their team and bring out all those qualities. No longer can you succeed just with one commander and all the rest followers. Now we want to build everyone into a leader, into a creative idea machine.
So you've trained people for what, close to 30 years or even more. How have you seen, leaders over these years sort of change? And what is, to your mind today, a good CEO?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question because, leadership hasn't changed a whole lot over the years, but obviously as we move forward, it needs to continue to evolve and raise its game, so to speak, to meet the challenges with the new economy. And so we're seeing a lot more interest in those people issues, in those people skills, in those people relationship building type of activities. And consequently, a lot of CEOs, especially from the baby boomer generation, don't have those skills. And consequently, they're either leaving the workforce or looking to develop those skills, because to deal with these new generation, you've got to have those skills because they interact and they communicate on all different levels.
So what is a good CEO in today's times? And also, does it vary? Does it depend on which part of the world we're talking about? What is the lifestyle there? What is the culture there? Or is it a sort of one size fits all?
No, I mean, it obviously varies, and it also varies from industry to industry and country to country and culture to culture, but I would say 90% is pretty universal, and then the other 10% allows for those differences. But the key is people, so the key is the good CEOs are great team builders. They build their own executive team, who then goes on to build teams below them so that they can start working together more in a unified fashion. No longer can we afford these huge bureaucracies and hierarchies of people that just sit around and watch other people work. So consequently, everybody has to contribute, and so everyone has to be a part of the team.
How does LMI, given that you guys operate in close to 80 countries, make sure that in your training programs, you keep in mind, you're mindful of the fact that there is a lot of local culture at play, and yet, you don't lose sight of the sort of larger global message?
Yeah. Well, what we do is we focus our programs on the universal principles of human behavior, human change, leadership, teamwork, those types of things, which are consistent from culture to culture. And then through our services that we provide with our programs, with the tools that we use, we're able to customize that for every culture, every organization, every country. So we take those universal principles and really apply them at a local level in unique ways to each situation that we encounter.
So let me talk about India then. what is it that companies today are looking for in terms of not just leadership, but perhaps innovative ways to motivate their employees? And again, has that changed over the years from the time that you sort of started operating here?
Well, it's not changed in terms of what's effective and what's not, but it's certainly changed in the methodology that many leaders are starting to use because they've had to change. In the way past, leaders basically led through fear. You do what I say or you're fired. And then they moved on to rewards. They tried to incentivize people. You do what I say and I'll give you a reward. But now leaders are realizing those are both external forms of manipulation. They're trying to manipulate people to do things. So now they're looking to engage their people, actually create intrinsic or internal motivation for people to do the job. And that takes a whole new set of skills of building those relationships, building that engagement, finding out what those individuals want on a personal level so that they can contribute to the organization on an organizational level.
Let's talk about India specifically. What are the kind of companies that are working with LMI? What are the sectors that have shown interest?
Well, we've worked with almost every sector across India, and we work with all types of companies in terms of size, small and medium-sized companies as well as large corporations. Our focus is really on the medium and small size because they don't have generally any people development themselves, and so they look to the outside companies to provide that. But many corporations are also realizing their HR departments are spending all their time in compliance, regulation, dealing with all the laws, employment laws, and they don't have time to really develop their people the way they want. So they use us as an expert to come in and really help them develop their leaders, develop their people, develop those teamwork type activities.
Let me talk about something that's been grabbing headlines here in India for unfortunately all the wrong reasons. Of late, you've seen a bunch of promoters who I think are just not willing to let go of the company that they built. And it's that transition phase that seems to be very challenging. How can founder promoters do this more effectively without not maybe meddling in the day-to-day functionings of a company, and yet the new leaders keep the intrinsic value of the founders intact?
Yeah, that's really where founders need to see as part of their responsibility is building those successors that can come in and take over. And in the way that they don't do that, they're not really fulfilling their responsibility as a founder. And consequently, that's a failure on their part to really mentor, coach, and develop that next generation of leaders. So we work a lot with founders, helping them to do that, develop those succeeding leaders that can come in, fulfill those responsibilities, but still maintain some of the founders' original vision, purpose, and mission of the organization.
Okay, let's keep it with the founders. Where do you think the buck should stop then for founders? How much of it should they let go, and how much should they sort of ensure that there is transition of core values in new hands?
Well, it obviously depends on each person's situation, but and there need to have a process or a transition period where they're actually planning the transition. Too many founders just get to a point and then all of a sudden stop and say, okay, good luck to the next generation, whereas it takes years for a successful transition, successful handoff to take place. So that needs to be planned out in advance in terms of who's going to be the successor, how they're going to fit in, how they're going to be mentored and coached through that process, what their development needs are, what specific skills they need to develop going forward, what role the founder is going to continue to play as they work through this transition, and then how they can eventually take over more and more of those responsibilities.
Randy, can everyone be a leader?
At different levels, yes. Not everyone can be necessarily a CEO or president of a country, but we feel leadership is important for every single person, not necessarily to lead others, but at least to lead themselves. And how we lead our own lives and how we lead ourselves personally is a foundation part of leading other people. So we work with all people up until we feel they've reached their leadership potential or they feel comfortable in the role that they're in. And so some people we work with just for a short period of time and help them become much more effective in their current role. Other people want to continue to move up the organization and obviously need more development to develop those skills and mindsets and attitudes necessary to succeed at those levels.
So, for everybody who's sort of watching, I think everyone wants a few tips and tricks on how to be a good leader. I myself have, sort of gone through your productivity program, and I found it extremely helpful that, you said that, look, you have to focus on the high payoff activities. You have to strive for results, not necessarily excellence. It's a very unique way of looking at it. For everybody who's watching, tell us a little bit more about how everyone can ensure more personal productivity at work.
Yeah, I mean, productivity is obviously on everybody's mind. Every business person wants more productivity. But productivity really boils down to how you spend your time. And unfortunately, most people spend their time on what we call non-high payoff activities, low payoff activities. And so what we do is we help people identify what are the most important elements of your job? What are the most important things that contribute to organizational success? What are the highest payoff activities that you do? And then how can we structure your time so you're spending much more of your time in those activities and a lot less time of your time in the low payoff activities. And just by shifting the way they use their time into high payoff activities, their productivity just goes up by leaps and bounds.
What about the bit about, focusing on results, not necessarily excellence? Because one would imagine that a good leader is someone who does everything perfectly.
Of course, but that we know that's not really true. Every leader has strengths, every leader has weaknesses. But the key is just focusing on a vague concept like excellence, you don't know where to shoot. You don't know what your target is. And so we feel it's critically important that you have clear targets or results that you're trying to achieve. And by clearly identifying those, by establishing very specific goals that you're after, it creates incredible focus to help you move towards that goal. As opposed to if you're just generally pursuing excellence, you could be doing anything and saying, well, I'm pursuing excellence. And that doesn't really need to lead to success.
Let's talk about, the business opportunities here in India. You talked about how, you've sort of successfully run and grown the business here. What's next in terms of, being able to reach out to many more businesses and companies? Are you also working in the listed company space, for example? Because we know that we have, an acute corporate deficit, a governance deficit there.
Yeah, we've been in India over 20 years now, and we're currently operating in 17 of the major cities in India, and we're looking to obviously expand that into the second-tier cities and beyond. But India is an incredible market for us. We think it's our #1 growth market going forward. Now, why is that? Well, they have the #1 workforce in the world in terms of number of people. Consequently, they have the greatest development needs, and they're going to need the most leaders going forward. So they have the greatest need for leadership development as well. So the opportunities here are just absolutely enormous, and we hope to play a big part in moving India forward economically and on the world stage.
In your experience, what are the challenges when it comes to leadership here in India specifically?
Well, one of the challenges we have is leadership has a long history of a very bureaucratic organization, very hierarchically structured, where they have many levels of managers. And when people are plentiful and don't really cost that much, you can afford to do that. But as you compete more and more globally, India realizes, hey, we can't have this whole series of levels of managers that watch other people work and make sure other people are working. And organizations are getting a lot flatter and flatter and flatter, which also makes them a lot more nimble and fast in today's economy, which is very important. So as you do that, you have to create better leaders because their span of control is going much greater. Instead of just managing 3, 4, 5, 6 people, now the average manager or leader is managing 15 people. And so they have to be much better in their leadership and management skills in order to do that.
Are there any challenges to India that are, unique to India? You talked about, bureaucracy and red tape and things like that. But, is there anything that, India has specifically to her that her own problems?
Not really. In fact, they have many advantages going from. Now, they don't have a Texas accent, so we deal with that occasionally. But other than that, no, they really don't. They have a very strong history of education. They have a very strong history of development. They're very interested in moving forward. They have an open economy and democracy. So they have many advantages to enable the businesses to succeed here. We just need to mobilize the people, mobilize that incredible asset that India has, get them more productive, get them moving forward to really move India into the top echelon.
Okay. Speaking of challenges, and I don't want to be specific to India, but let's talk about, what a good leader needs to display in times when there is either volatility, maybe there's a bit of a slowdown or any other business challenges. How does one sort of overcome those?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting concept because many organizations, many leaders are facing that exact scenario. The world's changing so fast, and a lot of them are going through difficult times or challenging times. One of the things that we do in developing leaders is we focus on developing them through a series of steps or stages. We start with what you talked about earlier, and that's their productivity, managing their time. But then we move them into personal leadership, which is all about their character, their values, how they lead their own life, which is absolutely critical to build a trust relationship with other people. If you don't have a strong character, people aren't going to trust you. And so that's critical for leaders, especially when they encounter difficult times, because their character is going to be tested, their values are going to be tested, and how do they respond to those challenges? Because people are going to be watching to see how they respond, which then becomes a role model, an example for their entire workforce. So we really focus on those steps and then moving into the further steps beyond that.
You know, you co-authored a book called The 5 Pillars of Leadership, which is of sorts a blueprint for leaders in the 21st century. For those watching, which are these 5 pillars?
Well, there's 2 concepts in our book. One is the foundation that the pillars are built on. And those foundations are 3 key values. And that's integrity, being honest, of course, is very important. A servant's heart. In other words, a leader is a servant. They serve other people. They've got to have that servant's heart in order to do that. And then third, of course, is their ability to interact with other people. Now, the 5 pillars that are built on that is really a formula on how to succeed in business or as a leader. It starts with a clear goal. Secondly is a clear strategy or plan. Third is a strong desire or passion. Fourth is having the confidence or belief that you can do it. And then fifth is just the determination, the grit, the resolve to see it through.
You know, another point that your productivity plan talks about is the ladder of delegation. And the argument that you're making is that if you're not chasing excellence and, you know, therefore you will be able to delegate a lot more to others in the team.
Yes, I mean, one of the challenges managers have is they think no one can do it as well as they can. And so why would I delegate something and get it done less perfectly or less well? And the problem with that is then they're limited in their effectiveness, because if they have to do everything, obviously they're not going to get much done. But the challenge with managers in delegating is they don't understand how to delegate. They either think it's a black and white issue, either or. I either delegate or I don't delegate. And so consequently they bounce back and forth between doing it all themselves or chaos, letting their people do it all. Whereas delegation is actually a series of steps or a process of learning how to do it and how for people to take on more responsibility. So you start out with a very basic level. Hey, I want you to just research some information for me. And then you move to another step. Hey, I want you to research some information and then bring me what you think we should do. And then you move to another step. Hey, I want you to come and let's discuss this together and make the decision together. And then finally, hey, I want you to make this decision and then come back and report how you did. So you have to train people how to make good decisions and how to take on additional responsibility. You can't just throw it at them and then say, see, I told you didn't know how to do it.
You know, Rani, that's another problem we face here in India. And I would imagine maybe, you know, it's a problem that most CEOs around the world face as well, is the lack of talent. And of course, while, you know, it can be argued that a lot of companies have to invest in their people and take it upon themselves to develop, you know, leaders, how can one go about effectively doing so?
Yeah, I mean, talent is a big issue today. You know, it's been said the team with the best talent wins, and so every organization is trying to attract that best talent. But there's 2 issues there. Obviously, employee development. You've got to be able to develop that talent, provide them with the opportunities for growth and learning so that they can find that talent within them and develop it. But I think a bigger issue is creating the space for that talent. And that's where the leaders have to develop. If the leaders don't develop, they create a ceiling where it doesn't allow that talent to grow. And so consequently, we're constantly working with leaders to grow themselves, which creates more space for the people below them to continue to grow and build their talent. And that's what helps retain that top talent, because they see opportunities for growth. They see that space that they can grow into, whereas if there's that ceiling, those people will tend to leave and go to other organizations for better development.
What about communication styles? And again, you know, another sort of argument that the LMI programs make is that empathy is very important. Something we spoke about at the start of, you know, this interview, that we're seeing a lot of CEOs now sort of exude empathy. Do you believe that going forward, that's going to be really key to being able to communicate effectively?
Yeah, it's an absolute fundamental part of being able to communicate and having the emotional intelligence to build relationships with people. The problem we have is technology is causing a huge drop-off in empathy. If we look at studies of the new generations who are using their phones to communicate rather than communicating face-to-face, their empathy levels are just plummeting. They're crashing. And consequently, we're going to have a huge problem with the millennials and Generation Z in building up those empathy levels and having them trained with emotional intelligence so they can communicate, build interpersonal relationships, become a leader, become a manager.
You know, since we're talking about empathy, I mean, let's talk about the two leaders who, again, have been in the news. It's Donald Trump and, of course, North Korea's Kim Jong-un. Very egocentric, and, so much aggression. Is that needed? I mean, is that really the way to be solving the problem?
Well, of course not. That's not going to solve.
Let me say, is there a better way to do it?
I'm sure there is. Now, with the North Korean leader, sometimes you can only meet aggression with aggression. And unfortunately, they've come to that point where neither one's going to probably back down and they're just going to continue to have a war of words. So that's a very difficult situation, and obviously don't have a lot of advice on how to better approach that. But generally speaking, you don't want to get into a war of words with people. That rarely solves the problem. And so having that emotional intelligence to see yourself in the other person's shoes and see what their issues are, what their needs are, what their goals are, helps you to solve the problem. If all you're thinking about is, no, I have to win at your expense, then you've created a win-lose situation where all you're going to do is combat with each other. You have to say, how can we make this a win-win situation where we both win, we both get what we want out of this, and we can move forward together rather than constantly butting heads with each other.
Donald Trump finishes a year in office, and how does his leadership style sort of compare to, Obama's?
Well, every leader has strengths and weaknesses, of course. Donald Trump's strengths is he has a very clear vision of what he wants to accomplish. He has a very pretty good strategy in place in terms of how he wants to do that. Some of his execution, I would say, could use some help. He needs to learn how to engage people more, bring people onto his team better, give them some more responsibility. I think if he would do that, he would find much more people supporting him in his efforts. But he constantly sees people either as friends or enemies, and he treats his friends well and his enemies not so well. So, whereas we need to see everybody can be our friend if we create the right relationship. So I think going forward, he's going to gradually learn that more and more as he runs into obstacles if he doesn't change. Because I think he has some good ideas. I think he has some good strategies, but he's got to have the people in place to get that done, and that requires that emotional intelligence, that empathy, that personal engagement.
So what would your advice to him be?
Take an LMI program.
Okay. What about our Prime Minister, Narendra Modi? What do you think of his leadership style?
There's a lot to like there. I mean, he's done some incredible things for India. One of the things we were talking about earlier is his work ethic. He gets to the office very early in the morning and he says, let's go, let's get started. We've got a lot to do. And that sets a great example, a great role model for the entire country. Hey, we need to be more productive. We need to be more proactive. We need to have more initiative. We need to get to work. And so I think that's a great example for the whole country. He obviously has some great people skills as well. Some people may disagree with some of his decisions, some of his policies, but that's always going to happen. He needs to continue with his strategy, continuing to open up India, continue to level the playing field in India, which I think he's trying to do, because that creates more opportunity for everybody. And then obviously international companies will be looking and say, hey, that's going to become a great market. We need to be there. We need to be in India. We need to serve that market. And it's just going to bring incredible investment to India.
All right, Randy, thank you so much for taking time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.